Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, welcome back to another episode of the ASB Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Nigel Grant, and today we're delving a little bit into the behind-the-scenes discussions, thinking, and thoughts on the potential future of KiwiSaver, our capital markets, all things investing. And while it might not be directly about what's happening in markets right now and flashing up on screens and charts, as we know with investing, it's what happens in the medium to long term with KiwiSaver and our industry that ultimately makes the biggest difference to investors and their savings. So for this conversation, we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming in another new guest to the show. Kirk Hope is the CEO of the Financial Services Council, or the FSC, as we know them in the industry. Kirk, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you, Nigel. I'm excellent. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's great. And because this is your first time, for the listeners, what's a bit more information about what the FSC is and does and the role you guys have in the industry?
Yeah, so the Financial Services Council is a non-profit member organisation with a vision to grow the financial confidence and well-being of New Zealanders. We've got over 100 members that really deal with managed funds, more than 100 billion under management, and we also have life insurers and health insurers. In terms of the claims, cover about 3.2 billion per year, so it's a reasonably sized set of segments that we work with.
And it's the industry group, isn't it, as such, or industry kind of support group, or?
Yeah, effectively we're there to be the voice for the industry, most particularly with government, but we do a lot of member engagement work. And of course, we do a lot of work that relates to how the industry interacts with consumers, which is pretty important.
And I've always thought of the FSC with some of the cracking research that you guys do as well. Either every few months there seems to be a new report out that helps the industry sort of know what customers are thinking about, what's on their minds, right?
Yeah, we've got a great guy in our team, David Bishop, who's been around for a while, who runs that research program, and it really digs into and helps, as you say, helps members understand what the public are thinking about, and it also helps them understand the demographics of the public that might be buying their products or investing.
Yeah, sure. And so before we get into kind of the state of KiwiSaver, as we're going to start, a little bit more about yourself, so listeners know a little bit more about you. You used to be the CEO of Business New Zealand and the Bankers Association as well.
I did, yeah.
And so, because I remember seeing you in the media and stuff from the Business NZ role, but, a little bit more about you. What do you get up to in your spare time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of surfing, so try and get out pretty much every weekend. If there's some good waves going on, I'll be travelling up or on either coast here in Auckland. So it's amazing that you can get out into, you can drive through or go through a bird sanctuary to get to a wave up in Tauwhanui in the regional park up there. It's pretty, that's world class, and stunning beach, and it's quite a good way to relax the mind and take a bit of pressure off.
I was going to say, from an executive role, and especially the complex nature of financial services, surfing I can imagine is the ideal.
Very head clearing.
Yeah, I bet. And so let's get into terms of our first topic, the state of KiwiSaver. So, whether it's your own or the FSC's thoughts on the current environment, what's top of mind for you guys for KiwiSaver overall at the moment?
For example, the government have been talking a lot about the role that they obviously want to create more infrastructure, and they are thinking about how to fund that. So in terms of the things that we're thinking about, it's sort of, how could you have a greater pool of capital in New Zealand? So increased contributions is one way of doing that. There's a bit of policy work going on at the moment around how KiwiSaver funds can invest in those types of assets, so the so-called private asset, if you like. So we've been doing a bit of thinking about that in New Zealand, just to show you the difference between New Zealand and Australia. Mm-hmm. Australian funds have about 16 to 20% invested in so-called private assets.
Is that like the big super funds you're meaning and things?
Yeah. And in New Zealand, that's around 2 to 3%. So it's quite a big differential, and it can play a pretty significant role in terms of developing some of those infrastructure projects that New Zealand really needs. So there's a big role to play, but in order to be contributing around 16%, you need a lot of money to be able to do that.
Yeah.
An Australian that you're looking at maybe $3 to $4 trillion.
Yeah, with a T. It's quite a lot different, isn't it? They started a lot earlier than us.
It's a scale difference, right? And you see that in the types of infrastructure that they're able to execute and the multiplicity of funding that they have to be able to do that.
And this all stemmed off kind of I think in late 2024, the then minister announced a bit of a review of KiwiSaver.
Yeah. Well, he kind of kicked off a capital markets review, but he also kicked off this initiative around how things that he could do or the government could do to reduce barriers to funds investing in so-called private assets. And, that's so we've been working with the industry on that. It has the potential to pay dividends in the future, I think.
Sure.
And make it easy again to do things that the types of things which the Australians are doing.
So we know that capital markets are critical to the future development and wealth of NZ and New Zealanders. How companies can grow and access capital to do it are core or central to this. For listeners that might be unfamiliar, let's discuss what's the background to that capital markets initiative, and why is it focusing on KiwiSaver and what might it mean for investors?
As I said earlier, it's really about removing barriers to investment in private assets in New Zealand. So, the background to that is really to figure out how to get more capital into, New Zealand businesses, right? So that's one component. And also how to ensure that, of course, when investment managers are making these decisions around where they put your money, they've got to think about a range of things, but the most important thing they have to think about is the return, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what they're looking for. So again, it's about sort of making sure that there are no barriers to New Zealand KiwiSaver fund managers being able to invest in assets in New Zealand. That can have a really, really positive effect for New Zealand businesses, but in particular areas, but also in places like infrastructure. So, and again, it's probably an opportunity.
And that capital markets review or initiative, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just necessarily about unlisted things, but it's about how can we get more companies to list?
Yeah, so on the listed front, that's really about incentivizing businesses to list.
Yeah.
Right, on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. For a small country, if you think about the proportion of GDP that is involved in the stock exchange, it's a bit low for New Zealand compared to other OECD countries. So that initiative is really about things that can, again, be done to encourage and incentivize businesses to use the stock exchange as a way to raise capital.
Yeah, and I guess it's for companies to potentially be proud at having listed type thing potentially versus either getting sold, being bought by someone else or staying private.
Yeah, and again, that's another way for New Zealanders to be able to invest themselves in other types of assets.
Before we get on to kind of we were going to talk about the benefits and barriers of kind of this unlisted avenue, but before we do that, why do you think the initiative is so important to the government at the moment? I guess, kind of building capital markets and this infrastructure kind of investment area. We know the Prime Minister this year has stated that it's, as I understand it, a year focused on growing NZ, and the economy, but with that in mind, but have some of the drivers been in focus for some time before that?
Well, I think the kind of answer to that is much less focused than this particular government is. I mean, I think we import a lot of capital, right? But there's plenty of things that we can do, and that's why the government has focused on a couple of those things. And we're encouraging them to focus on other things like, contributions, increased contributions over time. Because, I mean, if you look at the Australian example, the employers contribute, as at this year, it'll be about 12%.
And it's compulsory contributions there, right?
Compulsory contributions. So employers have to contribute that 12%. In New Zealand, it's 3 and 3. So the employer contributes 3 minus a small tax that the government takes. Thank you very much. Plus 3 for the employee, right? So and the employer doesn't have to contribute if the employee is not contributing, right?
Yes.
So again, it's a really significant set of changes. But the key thing there is, if we build up a significant New Zealand pool of capital, some of that can and should be deployed in New Zealand. Again, that comes down to the returns. That means that you need effective, efficient, competitive and innovative businesses for those fund managers to really invest in. And if they, if New Zealand is not operating at the at the forefront of where global firms are, then New Zealand fund managers would be right to invest in other assets offshore. So New Zealand businesses are a great opportunity, and it's a great opportunity for them, but they'll really need to be globally competitive.
Yeah, and I guess I've always thought that being listed sometimes forces that competitiveness as well. Like you actually, because you're a lot more scrutiny, you're in the eye of investors, more publicity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. More regulatory scrutiny, more structured framework in terms of the way that you build capital and you build the business, and then a lot of public reporting around how you perform. So, those are all good things actually.
And so we've talked about what this might mean for KiwiSaver at an overall level, but what about for individual members in KiwiSaver? So, what are the benefits the government see for KiwiSaver members? You've talked on it a little bit already, but why private assets for the individual investor?
Yeah, again, my view is it has to come back to the return.
Sure.
If there isn't a New Zealand offering that is globally competitive, then it should be the right of the fund manager not to invest in that, because ultimately they're there for the benefit of the member.
The fiduciary duty.
Exactly. Yeah. And that return is can make a significant difference to the purpose of what these funds are there for at the end of the day, which is someone's retirement income. So if they get it wrong, or they invest in something that's not providing that return, they have to have a pretty good look at that themselves.
Okay, so the government, through kind of the ministry being MB, or the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, highlights certain benefits for increasing investment in private assets. Can you, I guess, help listeners understand what they see the key drivers being? Yeah,
so the benefits that they see are better risk diversification, higher returns for KiwiSaver members, which we've already discussed, and kind of more broadly, economic benefits for New Zealand businesses and infrastructure development. So again, it's the access to capital that can really underpin that diversity in the business community, but also the adequacy of capital to grow, to innovate, and to be globally competitive.
And just to put you on the spot, but I'm sure it won't be too much of a curly question. But in your old role for Business NZ, did you see, was the average Kiwi business owner who you met that was trying to grow a big business, were they, did they think about listing it here, or was it always thinking overseas?
No. I mean, many of particularly the larger businesses that we dealt with were certainly listed, and the stock exchange itself has been very, very active in sort of providing a pipeline in terms of businesses that would come to market. I guess the bottom line is, why would you list? The reason, capital.
Sure.
You want to grow. You see opportunity in the market. You want to grow. You need capital to be able to do that. From New Zealand, one of the big challenges and opportunities is exporting. So you need capital to help develop yourself as an exporter, because you really are competing, in global markets often at the very forefront.
And we've touched on some of the key benefits that the FSC talk about. The government is underpinning kind of this drive, but there's obviously, with every benefit comes potentially a challenge. In bringing this to a reality. What are some of the key concerns or issues, barriers you're hearing, through the industry, being the voice of the industry as such, that we're trying to work through on this to bring it to life?
A couple of the hurdles that I'll cover off are, if you're investing long term in something like a road, which will have it'll have an income stream off it because it'll probably be tolled, right? But that's quite an illiquid asset. It's not easy to, for example, liquidate the road.
Yeah, or move it.
Or change it. So again, the issue there is really liquidity for the investor. So if you, for example, you want to retire, you hit 65 or whatever age you want to retire at, and you want to take your money out of KiwiSaver, the KiwiSaver manager then has to liquidate the road, except they can't.
Or sell it to someone else.
Yeah. Well, again, the liquidity process is one which has been highlighted by MB as a hurdle. I guess the other area is some of those assets, because often there won't be a big market for them, the valuations from them can be somewhat opaque. So that's another issue for, someone who's, for example, the fund manager that's invested in them, how they value those assets. And those are a couple of areas where MB have highlighted.
So final question before we get kind of into the other final question, but of this section, do you or the FSC have a view that, this growing pool of funds, we've talked about the Australian numbers around 3 or 4 trillion, we're at about 110, 120 billion, depending on which way the wind blows for our KiwiSaver pool, but do you think that growing pool of funds has a role or even an obligation in developing out New Zealand's, I guess, needs?
Yeah, I don't think there's an obligation, and I think you really have to take it back to the core purpose of what KiwiSaver is about, which is making sure that people can have dignity in retirement, and that's
the dignity word's it's forgotten sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's actually the most important thing, right? So if KiwiSaver doesn't provide that, then it's not doing the job that's on the tin.
Yeah.
So the other stuff is good, and you would expect that over time there will be increased investment in New Zealand. It will never be sufficient though, because again, you need diversification of risk. You'll possibly get better returns in certain markets elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So all of those things are the key considerations in relation to the return, and that's the most important thing because it's driving that opportunity for dignity in retirement.
And I guess that's the part that the government or I guess business owners, it's make sure there's enough supply there for us to consider it. And the final question before we get into kind of what you're reading, watching or listening, from your perspective or the the council, what does this all mean for the future of KiwiSaver?
Bright. So more assets for KiwiSavers to be invested in.
Mm-hmm.
More, and Kiwis are pretty passionate about our country, and so rightly they'll say, well, we would like more of our money to be invested in the things that we care about. So that's important. But ultimately, it's got to
pay its way.
Pay its way.
Yeah.
It's got to get the return.
I guess it'd be nice to be able to say that I own a portion of the road that I'm
that's right
driving on or tunnel I'm driving through. Okay, last question. I ask all the guests here. So thanks for coming on again. What are you currently reading, watching, or listening to that you'd like to recommend?
There's a great political podcast. There's a couple of great political podcasts.
Oh, very timely.
Yeah, for sure. New Zealand ones. One is called 3 Girls, 1 Hive. So it's basically 3 Wellington insiders, Georgie Stiliano, Bridget Morton, and Esther Robinson. They talk about all things political relating to Wellington, and they all have really good inside knowledge, and they're very smart people. So it's well worth listening to. And the other one is another political podcast that is hosted by Toby Manhire called Gone by Lunchtime.
Famous quote.
Yeah. And there's a couple of podcasters that join Toby, and he also interviews guests from time to time, and that's also very well worth listening to.
Are you a bit of a political aficionado?
Not really, but if you find yourself wandering around the waterfront, to try and stay semi-fit, those things are really good to be listening to. And again, it's an area which is quite important to kind of have your finger on the pulse of, because of the role that the Financial Services Council plays, and the role that government and politics plays in relation to that. So again, those podcasts help you keep connected to some of those things, and there's a lot of very erudite analysis.
Sure. Well, your hobby, I get the sense, helps you in your work life, or part of one of your hobbies.
Yeah.
Shame you can't. Well, maybe if you were podcasting while surfing, but maybe that defeats the point of surfing. My one that I was going to recommend was we didn't tee this up, but it's politically kind of aligned. There's a paper I read. Listeners will know my reading habits, but from Niall Ferguson, the historian. I think it's Niall on. He wrote the Ferguson rule, which is a paper on when a country's defence spending gets exceeded by their interest payments, and that has led to the downfall of great empires throughout history. So it was a light 50 pages, but I thought it was pretty prescient at the moment for kind of what's going on with the states and different empires and stuff. So that was really, really interesting, and I'd recommend it. That or the podcasts that Kirk has put forward. Kirk, thank you again for your time and expertise today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. We hope to have you back soon. And we know that, as I said at the top of the show, the FSC puts out really interesting research reports during the year. So if you'll come back from time to talk through those, we'd love to have you.
Most certainly.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in again. We hope you found this discussion interesting. And as you can see, there's a lot of interesting questions being posed for growing NZ and the part that KiwiSaver and your investments can play in that. But until next time, happy investing, and it's bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.